good morning. I feel like I've seen you guys a couple of times at this point. So, all right, my friends that are back there, I'm going to point you out because you get to come to the front. Oh, they've got some sliding space. All right, good. All right, I have something great to tell you. Today we have set out every chair that I own. Yeah, that's exactly right. For those of you who've been with us for a while, you know, so 6 months ago we were meeting in my living room, and there were 30 of us in the living room. And today for the very first time, I think we're going to break 100. I haven't heard what the numbers are over in kids in preschool, but yeah, glory to God on that. Definitely. So it's no joke that you guys are here today, even though it is April Fool's Day. It really is no joke that you're here, and I'm really glad that you're here. Today is the end of our series, right? We've been doing a series for the last 6 weeks called Walking Dead of the Bible, and we have looked at 5 other stories of people who came back to life, right? And really, let me tell you, there was a trick to all of that, because those people who came back to life, all of them experienced something exactly the same. They died again. It's not like you can go walk over and take a boat, take a plane ride over into Israel and go, hey, is Laz in there? I want to go see Lazarus. I want to see how he's doing because I know he came back from the dead. I want to know how that was going on for him. Right? He died again. Now, normally, with all of this, I would spend some time kind of recapping the stories that we've been in and what it is that we've been unpacking and learning. However, today I'm going to tell you, you're just going to have to go back to YouTube to watch any of those if you get excited and interested about anything that we've been doing. They're all there. All of our messages up to this point are all on YouTube. In fact, we're live streaming right now. So if for whatever reason, I know Susan is getting ready to go back to Canada, so she'll be watching us from Canada because she's going to be staying plugged in. Rob, we're hoping that you watch with her, all right? No, but today I thought we'd do something a little bit different. Since today is April Fool's Day, I thought we would start with a little game. A game of Can I Fool You? All right? So, here's how the game works. There's been a lot of fake news in the world today, right? You guys have heard that term a lot. Our president has probably made that term more universal in American households. But so here's what I thought we would do. I'm going to put some news stories up on the screen. If you think it is a fake news story, I want you to point to the left. Everybody point to the left for me. Very good. See, my right, your left would be very different. So see if I did it. Okay? So if it's a fake news story, you're going to point that way. If you think it's a real story, it's something that really happened, I want you to point to the right. Okay? So right is true, left is not. This is not a political statement, by the way. All right? So, here we go. Let's see the very first story up on the screen. Majority of American teens think that the G7 is Google's new smartphone. Right? So if you think that's a true story, you're going to point to the right. If you think it is a fake news story, you're going to point to the left. All right, you guys, everybody locked in? Adira, you're not locked in. I don't see it there. She's like, I don't know what to do. I know. All right, everybody locked in? Okay, and the answer is? Oh! It was a fake news story. It wasn't a real thing. All right, here we go. Next one. Let's see the next one. All right, vaccines are being labeled the new gateway drug to heroin. Vaccines are being labeled the new gateway drug to heroin. So if you think this is fake news, point over there. If you think this is real news, point over there. Give you a moment to decide. Briley's still thinking on it. She's reading the article up there as it's up on the screen. She's like, is there more details in here so that I can figure this out? All right, let's see the answer. The answer is? Oh, fake news again. Hey, this one actually caught a lot of traffic on the internet. As you can imagine, there are a bunch of people who are don't vaccinate your child, and so they were reposting this. It was clickbait for them over and over and over again. It kept showing up in those networks. If you're a homeschooler, this was one that definitely went rampant through individuals who were related to homeschool networks of stuff. So it was really interesting. All right, next story. Let's see the next story. Trump's tweet cost Lockheed Martin $28 million per character. Trump's tweet cost Lockheed Martin $28 million per character. All right, lock it in. Here we go. Let's see what the answer is. Oh, it is real news. It is real news. Their stocks dropped like $1.4 billion in the course of about 48 hours. I think they've since bounced back. I think they're okay since all of that. But when it happened, it did. His tweet cost them a whole lot of money. All right, let's see the next one. Problematic President Trump becomes fake news. Problematic President Trump becomes fake news. By the way, the picture of the horse tells you something about this one because it's actually a story about a horse named President Trump. All right, I see a few hands that are out. Get them locked in. All right, let's see what the answer is. The answer is, oh, it was real news. So apparently this horse was not very fast. And so when they put him back out into the pasture and said, hey, he's not gonna race for us, they renamed him from President Trump to fake news. Which I think is kind of funny because they weren't really making a statement about President Trump, they were just making a statement about this horse is fake news, he's not really gonna happen. So I thought that was pretty good. All right, next one. All right, a Jackson husband and wife shocked after a DNA test reveals that they are biological twins. Jackson husband and wife shocked after DNA test reveals that they are biological twins. I see a lot more puzzled looks on this one. All right, let's lock it in. Here we go. In 3, 2, 1. Let's see the answer. Oh, it was fake news. It was fake news. It was clickbait. They just wanted you to click on the story to try to read what was going on. All right, here we go. Next one. I think this is our last one. All right, jury convicts woman who laughed at Jeff Sessions during a Senate hearing. Jury convicts a woman who laughed at Jeff Sessions during a Senate hearing. All right. Several fake newsers over there. Few real newsers over there. All right, let's see what the answer is. The answer is, it was real news. Real news. I have to admit, this game was hard, right? I mean, all of those seem like they could have been real stories, but some of them came from things that were no more real than our National Enquirer, right? We look at the National Enquirer and we go, oh, we know that that's fake news, but today on the internet, especially on Facebook, it's a lot harder to determine what is fake news versus what is real news. Well, in our story today, there is some fake news that happens. Some fake news that happens. By the way, speaking of things that happen with the news, I ran across a couple of really interesting stories. In 1983, there was a Boston University professor, and he got a phone call from the Associated Press and said, hey, are you an authority on April Fool's Day? And he did the same thing. He kind of laughed. He was like, sure, whatever. Yeah, call me an authority on April Fool's Day. They sent a reporter out to come interview him. And the reporter was like, hey, so tell me something about April Fool's Day. And he's like, oh, I don't know anything about April Fool's Day. And he's like, no, seriously, I mean, don't be so humble about stuff, you know. He's like, really? And the reporter just kept badgering until finally this professor decided to make up a story on the spot about April Fool's Day. And so he made up a story. He said, listen, here's how it started. He said, back in the year 323 AD, when Constantine was emperor of Rome, he said the jesters that were in the court convinced him to allow for one day a year for a jester to be king. And he was like, oh, this is fascinating. The guy was writing it down. He was like, oh, this is funny. He's like, okay, I'm going to make the story a little bit more elaborate so this guy will catch on. Because he's like, he's in Boston. There's something that's really big apparently in New York. Do we have any New Yorkers in the room? I know that, Mark, you're like, ish. right? Okay, so apparently kugels are a big thing, right? There in New York. I don't know, I've never had one. I don't even know what they are, like a little bagel, I guess, is what they are. Is that right, Mark? Are they like a bagel, a kugel is? Yeah. Okay, there you go. See, you have to ask for authenticity's sake, because I don't know it. So he said, all right, so the first jester his name was Kugel, and so he became known as King Kugel. I was like, okay, he was like, surely this guy will get this. And he's like, and he instituted all these pranks we played on April the 1st. And a couple days later, the article showed up in the paper. And the professor was like, oh my goodness, I totally made the whole thing up. He's like, I tried to be as elaborate as possible, that none of it was real news, but they didn't figure any of it out. And so he walked in, because he happened to be a journalism professor. And he walked in and he told all of his students, he said, look, I want to show you how gullible our media is today. They'll run with anything. They don't fact check stuff. They'll just run a story. He said, look at this story. Well, sitting inside of his journalism class was the editor for the school's newspaper. And so they ran an article that says, Professor Fools AP. And the AP press read the article. You can imagine that they were not very happy over all of that, right? That's not the first time that that's happened. In fact, in 1917, there was another journalist, right? And he wrote a fake news story because the war was about to break, and so he wanted to write some sort of a interesting piece that people would enjoy reading. And he said, look, we have missed an anniversary. We've missed the anniversary of the modern bathtub. 75 years ago, he said, the modern bathtub was brought to us by President Fillmore. Which, by the way, that's a real president. I had to go look it up, that Millard Fillmore is a real president, right? I was like, oh, no, surely he's just making that up, too. No, Fillmore's a real president. He said he was the first president to introduce a bathtub into the White House. And now the White House has bathtubs and running water because of President Fillmore. Big story. Got carried by all of the major networks. It was fake. He completely made the whole thing up. And you know what? Still to this day, people still quote that story as a real story of something that happened. How interesting is that? How interesting that happened. Our story today, though, I told you already, it has some fake news inside of it. And I want to see if you can catch the fake news that exists inside of our story. So if you've got your Bibles, open them up to Matthew. Matthew chapter 28. So Matthew is, if you open your Bibles, in the very middle, you'll be in about the book of Psalms. And if you flip about halfway on the backside, you'll be near the book of Matthew. Now, Matthew was one of the 12 disciples. Sometimes you'll see his name written as Levi, right? He was the tax collector. That's who he was. It's what he did before he became a Jesus follower. But then he became a Jesus follower. And Matthew is interesting because as a book, he has a whole different point than the other three Gospels. He wrote specifically to all of the Israelites. If you were a Jew, he was writing for you. That kind of rhymes, right? If you were a Jew, he was writing for you. Now, I don't think very many of us in this room are Jewish. But that's okay. Because Matthew was writing for the Jews, and he was writing to show them that Jesus was the awaited Jewish Messiah. He wanted them to connect the scriptures in the Old Testament to who Jesus was. And so when you look at Matthew, there are more references to the Old Testament in Matthew than any other gospel account. Not only that, but Matthew makes allusions to things that happened in the Old Testament. As you read Matthew, you will start to think of stories in the Old Testament because of the way that he wrote his account. And for that reason, Matthew is the first book of the New Testament. Have you ever noticed that our New Testaments are they're not in like alphabetical order? Not only that, they're not even given to us in like chronological order as to like who maybe wrote first, second, third, and fourth. We think Mark wrote first, Luke was second, Matthew was third, and John was last. Well, that's not how we have them in our Bibles. We have Matthew first. Well, Matthew's been placed first because Matthew was this link between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and everybody understood that that's what Matthew was trying to do. And so he was intentionally placed there at the very beginning of the New Testament as that link between the Old and the New. So, let's jump into our story. Matthew 28, we're going to start in verse 1. It says this. It says, Now, after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the very first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake. And an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled the stone away and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. I love that. We're in a series about The Walking Dead, and it talks about these guys were so petrified with fear about what they were observing that they became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here because he is risen, just as he said. Come, see the place where he lay, and then go quickly and tell the disciples that he's risen from the dead, and he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him. I've told you all of this. So they departed quickly from the tomb with fear and great joy. And they ran to tell the disciples, and behold, Jesus met them and said, Greetings. And they came up and took hold of his feet, and they worshipped him. And then Jesus said to them, Don't be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee, and there they will see me. While they were going, behold, some of the guard went back into the city and told the chief priests all that had taken place. And when they had assembled with the elders and they had taken counsel, they gave a sufficient sum of money to the soldiers. And they said, Tell people, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we'll satisfy him, and we will keep you out of trouble. And so they took the money, and they did as they were directed. And this story has been spread among the Jews even to this day. Let's pray. God, I pray that you would use these stories, a story with real news and a story with fake news, that you would use it in a mighty way to show us what's real. And God, that you would show up real in this room right now, in a way that is undeniable to every heart that's here. God, I just continue to give you glory and honor in your name. Amen. Well, on this April Fool's Days, by the way, if you're under the age of 60, you have never seen an Easter on April Fool's Day. The last April Fool's Day with Easter was in 1956. Yeah. Now the next one will be in 11 years in 2029. It'll happen again, right? So it's happened a couple of times, and you'll get, most of you, I hope, will get to see it again, right? But on this day with April Fools, where pranks run rampant, and with a day and an age where there is real news and fake news intermixed, and it is difficult to tell the difference between the two, I think it's only fair to ask the question, is Jesus a hoax? Is Jesus a hoax? I don't know about you, but I've had my moments where I doubt the reality of everything that exists inside of the Bible. Probably a pastor is not supposed to tell you that. But it's true. There are moments where I go, did somebody just make all of this stuff up? Am I just following a lie? So I thought today, what better day than on April Fool's Day, on Easter Sunday, to look at those questions and go, is Jesus a hoax? You know, this week I read about a pastor who said that it wouldn't matter to them if Jesus' body was found. If an archaeological dig was to unearth the body of Jesus today, They said my life would not change one iota. The next Sunday I would show back up at church, and that pastor went on to say that they thought that the majority of churchgoers, it would not change a thing for them either. I want you to know something. For me, if they found Jesus' body and he was dead in a grave, it changes everything. I won't be here the next week. I'll be looking for a new job. Because everything that I believe is predicated upon the fact that Jesus came back to life. It changes everything. You know, is Jesus fake news, right? That's the question. Now, some of you who are sitting here when I asked that question, you probably were going, no, not for me. Jesus is not fake news for me. I don't even know why Charles would bring that up or ask that question. But you know what? I think it's okay to explore this idea for just a few minutes. So hang on with me, because I think that there are people that are sitting in this room who they're probably on the fence. They know that God maybe exists over here, and they know that there may be some sort of thing about eternity, but they've been walking their life on a fence with no response whatsoever to either side. I also know that there are lots of people in this world who do believe that Jesus is fake news. They believe that he's a creation of the church. I talk to them. They're like, you can have what you want, and you can have whatever it is that you want to believe. But for me, that's just not true. I have to think that you probably have talked with some of those people too. Or maybe you're just like me and you've had your doubts at some moment about these questions that we're going to walk through today. Did he really live? Did Jesus really die? And did he really come back to life? So I thought, let's just walk through those questions. Here's the first one. Did Jesus really live? Did he really live? Was he a historical person, or was it fictional from the very beginning? Now, the great thing about that question is we go, oh, we have all this evidence in the Bible, but what if the Bible was what was made up? What do we do then? What assurances in reality do we have that Jesus was a real person? I guess the first thing that I would probably ask somebody who says that back to me, I was asked the question of, well, do you believe in Julius Caesar? Most of us probably believe in Julius Caesar. We think that he was probably a real person. How about Tiberius? Sure, we think that he was a real person. How about Nero? Yeah. Most of those Roman emperors, we would agree, are real people. And we would agree because we have some sort of external evidence about them. In fact, there was a guy, his name was Tacitus, and he wrote what's called the Annals of all of the Roman emperors. And he wrote their story as a historian. And inside of his story, he talks about Jesus. And he talks about people who followed Jesus. This was not a guy who was a Jesus follower who was writing so that we would all follow Jesus. It was a guy who was writing about Roman history and the things that happened in Roman history. And by the way, he says that there was this guy named Pontius Pilate who oversaw what happened to Jesus. Now, there are a tremendous amount of additional evidences, but this one is one of the best in Tacitus. And if you're interested in that and you want to know, how do I know more and how can I talk to somebody about some other external evidences outside of the Bible about what and how we know that Jesus was really a historical being, he lived on this earth, I dropped it on our Facebook page because I only have about the next 20 minutes to keep talking. I could go on for 20, 25, 30, 40 minutes about all the different evidences that we have that Jesus really lived. In fact, did you know that today most scholars And I don't mean just biblical scholars, I mean anybody in any sort of historical scholarship field, do not deny that Jesus really lived. He was a real historical person. And so I think that brings us to our second question. Because if Jesus did in fact live in the first century, then the question becomes, did he die? If he really lived, and everybody believes that he lived, they can prove that he lived through all of these other things, at least as well as they could prove that Julius Caesar and Tiberius and Nero and all of these Roman emperors existed, then did he really die? Now, I don't mean that this idea of we could go over to Jerusalem today and Jesus is still walking around. But I mean, did he die a crucifixion? Did he die murdered as an insurrectionist who wanted to overthrow the government? Those are the charges against him. I think one of the most interesting pieces of literature actually comes from the Jews on this. They have a collection of writings called the Talmud. And the Talmud is, it's kind of like scribe notes, if you will, of things that would happen and going on, and they would collect them all together and their thoughts. And inside of the Talmud, there are two different pieces of information. The first one is that the charges of Jesus are listed in there, because it listed just like anytime that we have a meeting that gets together and we have meeting notes, they would list their notes of what happened inside of their councils. And one of the councils is the council that said Jesus has to die. He has to die because he's a blasphemer and we will stone him to death. That was the only sort of charges that they had as a Sanhedrin to be able to bring against Jesus. They brought them. They also said that inside of that nobody came to his defense, not even himself, to defend against these charges. And then later on, the Talmud records this. It says that they were not allowed to stone anybody from 7 AD till 70 AD. The power of that, with the exception of 2 small years in there, about 40 and 41, had been taken away from them. And so because of that, they had to turn him over to the Romans. Not only that, they were getting ready for a Passover feast. And anybody who engaged in any of those capital things would have been deemed ceremonial unclean. And so the Jews handed him over to be killed by the Romans. Later on in that same Talmud, it tells us that Jesus was not stoned, but he was hanged. And you're going, oh, wait a second. Neither one of those two things match up with what it is that we're saying that happened inside of the Bible. I thought you said that he was crucified. And we think of him hung up, strung up on a cross. What do you mean that he was hung? Well, hanging is a Jewish euphemism for what crucifixion was. When Peter is there in Acts and he's talking to the Sanhedrin, he says, "You're the ones who hung him on a tree and caused him to die." You know, we think about these giant stakes in the ground like railroad ties that were there, giant hole, and they would have erected this massive scene, and that's probably not what took place. They definitely had a big beam that he would have carried through the city, at least until he couldn't any longer, because he'd been scourged to a point of not being able to even walk the couple of miles down the road to be able to be crucified. But then they would have taken the beam and they stretched him out, but they would have then nailed the beam to a giant tree that was right along the road. Can you imagine if your back was split open from all of the whips and chains and things that had been beating on him, and then you're up against a tree struggling to breathe? you had to raise yourself up and down, oh, it was not designed to be a pleasant thing. Here's the other thing. John records this. John records that it says, but when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they didn't break his legs. But as one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. And he, that's John, who saw it, is bearing witness to it. This testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you might believe. John, one of the 12, was there when Jesus died. He witnessed everything that Jesus went through. And he watched as the Roman soldiers did their job. Their job was killing people. They were professionals at it. In fact, one book that I read said that the reason for the scourging that they did of the whips and the chains was that their goal was for somebody to die there so they didn't have to go through any of the next pieces of the process. It's like in baseball, when you go out in Little League style and you get up 10 or 12 runs on a team and you have run ruled them and you get to go home early. Right? I remember those games. We always looked forward to them, right? If you were the winning team, you were like, we're going to try to get out of this thing early today and go home because we're that good. And that was the opinion of the Roman soldiers. And just to make sure, they took the spear and they stabbed it in his side. And what ran out was blood and water. John was not a doctor. In fact, I think most of us in this room would say that medicine has come a long ways in understanding in the last 2,000 years. And medicine in the 1970s discovered that when somebody's heart bursts inside of them, what comes out, if you were to pierce their side, would be a mixture of blood and water together. I don't know how you survive a heart bursting. With our medical technology today, I don't think somebody could survive their heart bursting. Jesus died. Jesus died. I want to lean in here for just a second because there's a reason why Jesus died, and I want you to understand something, because Jesus didn't have to die. You say, what do you mean he didn't have to die? I mean, Jesus had never sinned. And here's what I believe, and here's what the Bible tells us. The Bible tells us that sin equals death. The reason that all of us as humanity must die at some point is because there's a penalty for sin, and it was given to Adam and Eve in the garden. It was passed down through all generations, and you and I have made choices that are not in accordance or pleasing to who God is. And because of that, we have sin, and God is holy, which requires that nobody who has sin can come into his presence. So Jesus, the Bible tells us, who knew no sin, became sin. He died. He made a choice to die for you and for me, for a penalty that he didn't deserve. He didn't do anything that was not pleasing to the Father, but you and I sure have. So I want us to understand that Jesus didn't have to die, but he made a choice to die. So not only did he really live, but he really died. So that leaves us with our third question, right? If Jesus really lived, and we can prove that, and Jesus really died, then did he come back to life? Did Jesus really come back to life? Look back with me at verses 5 and 6. It says this. It says, "Do not be afraid. For I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He's not here, for he has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he laid, and then go quickly and tell the disciples that he's risen from the dead." And behold, he's going before you to Galilee, and you'll see him there again, just as he told you. You see, the angels invited the women to come and to see. They not only told the information, but they said, come see the evidence of Jesus coming back to life. Luke, one of the other accounts, says this. It says, as they were frightened and bowed their heads down. This is the same women. And he said, and the angels said to them, why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here, but he's risen. Remember how he told you while you were still in Galilee that the Son of Man would be delivered into the hands of sinful man and be crucified, and on the third day he would rise again. And they remembered his words. As best I can, I think there's 4 explanations of what happened here in the text. Here's the first one. They went to the wrong spot. Right? Logical. It could have happened. They went to the wrong spot. Now, guys in the room. This never happens to women, but guys in the room. Have you ever gone to the mall? Right? And when you come out of the mall, whatever it is about that place, it always disorients me, and I can never find my car when I get back out of the mall. Some of you are with me. All right, Butch, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's true. I have to be that weird person by myself who is out there clicking the car alarm. Which direction do I need to go? One time, I even came out on the total opposite, so clicking the button wasn't even going to help me out, right? But my wife, on the other hand, we go in the mall, and she's like, no, we need to go 2 doors down, and we're on G32 all the way down there. I'm like, we're on what? She's like, yep, just trust me, this is the door we need to go out. And I'm like, okay, listen, you don't even know which way is north, south, east, and west when we're on the highway. You can't find anything when we're driving around town. She's like, I know, but in the mall, I know where I'm at. It's true. It's true, she has a gifting. These women, 2 days before, on Friday, all 4 gospel accounts, these women are the ones who followed Jesus' body to the tomb. They knew where he was supposed to be at. They didn't have the wrong spot. They didn't have the wrong place. Let's just suppose for a second that they did. Let's suppose for a second that they had showed up at the wrong place. The question that comes to my mind is that all of these people began to follow Jesus, and as the Jewish leaders began to say, this is becoming a problem. We're going to lose control. They're no longer listening to us or following us. What are we going to do? How is it that nobody in that room said, there's an easy way to take care of this whole thing? Let's just go get the body. Right? We'll end this whole thing. Let's go get the body. Because they went to the wrong spot. We know right where the body's at. Explanation 2. The disciples moved the body. Right? This is what we read in Matthew's account. It said that they went there and it said to tell everybody. In fact, they said, as a guard, we're going to pay you. Here's the sum of money. We want you to tell everybody the disciples took the body. Now, I want you to understand what it is that they are saying in this moment. We had a small Roman guard, right? Now, generally, we picture like 1 or 2 people there. This was really because they were taking shifts throughout the night. It was probably a small garrison of somewhere between 6 and 10 guards. Okay? They're highly trained professionals. They go to battle. They would stop whole rebellions happening in their places because they are that kind of skilled. And so we're to believe that in the middle of the night, 12 fishermen 12 fishermen got the drop on these guys, took out the entire garrison without killing a single one of them, got the body, and moved it somewhere. If you want to believe that, I've got some beachfront property to sell you. I'm telling you. But wait, let me just take it one step further. Chuck Colson. If you don't know who Chuck Colson is, he was one of the guys in Watergate, right? Chuck Colson said this, and I saw memes of it all this week, and I loved it. He said he became a bigger believer in Jesus and the veracity of Scripture when Watergate happened. He said, we had some of the greatest minds, all part of the Watergate scandal. And he said within 40 days, to a person, every one of them had broken. And they had changed their story, and they had admitted to their lie. For the next 40 to 60 years, not a single disciple changed a word of their story. And most of them suffered horrendous torture and death that all they had to do was say it's fake news, and it would have all been over. And they didn't. Explanation number 3. So it could have been they went to the wrong place. Could have been the disciples moved it. Here's explanation 3. The Romans or the Jews moved the body. And I think this one kind of falls back in that same category as number 1, right? Because if they moved the body, where is it? Why did they never produce it? But I want you to see something that really kind of ties 2 and 3 together, because look at Scripture. John's account says this. It says, so she, which is Mary, went to Simon Peter, and she went to the other disciples, the one who Jesus loved, and she said to them, they have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they've laid him. She was the first one on Sunday morning to get there. She looked in, tomb's open, Jesus is not there. She runs back to Peter and James and John and says, they've taken him. So right there, I'm like, okay, more evidence that the disciples probably didn't do this thing, because Mary knew where the body was at. Not all the disciples knew where it was at. And so she runs back to them. And if they had taken the body right here, I kind of expect for them to go, oh, no worries, Mary. We know right where it's at. But instead, Peter and John engage in a foot race to get to the tomb. Still not there. Later on in John it says this. It said, they said to the woman, which is the angels, why are you weeping? And she said to them, they've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. And having said this, she turned around, and Jesus was standing there. Now she didn't know it was Jesus. And so Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Who is it that you're seeking? And supposing that he was the gardener, she said to him, sir, if you're the one who carried him away, just tell me where you put him. Just tell me where you put him, and I'll take care of everything. The disciples' earliest assumption was not that Jesus came back to life. You know why I love that? Because it comes down as it's the only conclusion left after you've erased everything else out. They didn't have the wrong spot. They didn't move the body. And the Jews and the Romans didn't move the body. So the only thing that was left was Jesus moved his own body. And the only way he could possibly do that was not be dead. Well, he is dead because we just covered all of that. So something incredible took place. And unlike all of the 5 stories that we looked at, and by the way, we may have to have like a season 2 of Walking Dead in the Bible, because I found out that there's like another 6 or 7 stories that are in the Bible that are all about people who come back to life. All of those people died again. Guess what never happened to Jesus? He never died again. He's still alive today. That's the real news. That's the good news about Easter. When you strip everything away, it's that Jesus is alive. Amen is right. And it changes everything. You know, I love in Luke when it said, why are you looking for the living among the dead? You know, it's so true in our lives, in our worlds. We look for life among dead things. Our works, none of it goes with us in the end. Our money, none of it goes with us in the end. Other people, they're not going to get you to the end. We look for life in other places. But Jesus said, look, he said, I came to give life. In fact, John records him saying this. He says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. And I love this because Jesus was killed between two thieves. And he says, thieves come only to steal and kill and destroy. And I come that you may have life and have it more abundantly. Look, at the end of the day, none of us can offer something that we don't have. If I'm broke and you need money, I can't help you. I don't have it to give out. And if Jesus is dead, then he can't offer me life. But Jesus is alive, and he does offer me life. He offers me a life that is eternal, but he offers me life right now. That I don't have to pursue dead things, but I can pursue the living thing. Here's what the Bible says. The Bible says that Jesus gives that gift away freely. In fact, I was thinking about the difference between a lie and life is just the letter F. Something that's free. Freedom is found in Jesus. And he gives life, gives it freely. And here's how he does it. He says, I'm willing to give it freely to anybody that asks for it. In fact, the Bible says this in Romans 10:9. It says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, then you will be saved. Listen, the humanity in us knows that we need saving. To a person, if I was to ask everybody in this room, I think we could all come to the same conclusion that we're not good. Of our own accords, we are not good. In fact, there's nothing that we could do to be good enough. In fact, if we were to be honest, that just one sin, one thing that we do, one thing that we say, one thing that we think that is not pleasing to God would be enough for us to earn the penalty of death, then I think we would all go, oh, I'm screwed. Because in my life, I would have earned all of those death penalties. I would have a death penalty that is so great that I could never repay it. And some people go, well, wait, that's not a God of love. Time out for a second. If a guy is in front of a judge and he's committed 100 murders, and the judge says at the end, I'm just giving him one life sentence, everybody would cry out, that's unfair. What about the other 99 lives that he took? He should have sentencing for all of that too. God says, yeah, you're right. So for every sin that I've ever committed, I have a death sentence on my life. And I could never pay it back. And so Jesus paid it all. He paid off my debt. Paid off your debt. So that we could have life. I'm going to ask everybody in here to bow your head and close your eyes for just a moment. Because in a room this size, I have to think that there were some people who started off the day on the fence about who Jesus was and about what Jesus claimed to have done. And I hope that you have a very clear picture now of Jesus being a real person who really lived. Jesus was a real person who really died, and he really came back to life. Maybe for the first time you're saying, you know what? I believe. I believe what it is that you're sharing. And if that's you, for the very first time you say, you know what? I want to give my life to that. I want to ask for life from Jesus. If you do me a favor, look right here at me. Just make eye contact with me. Those of you that are in this room that have said that, here's what we're going to do. Just a moment, we're going to say a prayer. And it's as simple as 3 letters. A, B, and C. And A stands for I admit something. That I admit that I am a sinner. That I don't deserve to be with God forever. That I deserve to be separated from him because he's good and I'm not. B stands for this. Believe. I believe that Jesus is the one who made a way for me. He wants to give me life. Here's the most important part. C is for choose. You have to say, I want to make a choice to make Jesus the one that's in charge of my life. So if that's you, right now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead us in a prayer. You just say it in your mind, right? But at the end of everything today, you say, you know what? I made that choice. Would you come tell me? Because I want to know and I want to celebrate with you about the choice that you just made. So here's what we're going to pray. You can repeat after me in your own mind. There's nothing special or magical about the prayer. It's about your heart. It goes something like this. Jesus, I know that I'm a sinner. And I don't deserve to be with you forever. But I believe that you died for me. And you came back to life to give me life. And so today, I'm choosing you to be my Lord and to save me. In Jesus' name, amen. In just a moment, we're going to do something a little bit different today. I know we're probably a little bit over time. We're getting close. Here's what we're going to do. Shannon's going to come up and she's going to play a song. If that's you, if you said, hey, I want to make that choice today. I did make that choice today. I've never done that before, but I chose to make Jesus in charge of my life. I want to challenge you in just a moment. As Shannon's playing, I'm going to come stand at the back of the room over in this corner over here. Come see me. Come talk to me. Because I have one more thing I'm going to challenge you with today if you made that choice. Because in just a moment, we're going to take some friends out that have made that choice in the last couple of weeks. And they're going to make a public display of that called a baptism. And I'd love to talk with you about what that looks like. Maybe you don't want to do it today, but we could get some time to talk about that some more. So Shannon's going to play. I'm going to go back over in the corner. And if you made that choice today, would you come see me and come talk with me?